Hello, everyone. I am Maria Victoria Murillo, the director of the Institute of Latin American Studies at Columbia University, and I have the pleasure to welcome everyone to this new webinar of the Institute of Latin American Studies, which is also co-sponsored with the Columbia Global Centers in Rio and Santiago. This webinar is called Argentina Between COVID-19 and a Sovereign Debt Crisis, and is part of our series on COVID-19 in Latin America. All prior webinars, as well as data and analysis on COVID-19 consequences on education, the economy, and governability in the region, are available for everyone in our website at ilas.columbia.edu. This is also the first event of our new Argentine Studies programs, which will bring its first two visiting scholars the next academic year. And we will collaborate with also the newly created Argentine Students Association. We have the pleasure of having with us three very distinguished panelists. We have the Minister of the Economy of Argentina, Martín Guzmán, who until last year was a researcher at the Columbia University Business School and the director of the Public Debt Restructuring Program of the Policy Dialogue Initiative, also at the Columbia Business School. Martín Guzmán is also a professor in the School of Economics at the National University of La Plata and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Globalization and Development. Welcome, Martín. We also have with us another Martín Uribe, who's a professor of economics at Columbia University and a research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research. He's an expert on international economics, monetary economics, and public finance with a focus on understanding the sources and propagation of macroeconomic shocks within and across countries, and on the design of monetary, fiscal, and exchange rate-based stabilization policies. He has recently co-authored Open Economic Macroeconomics, published by Princeton University Press, and he has a forthcoming book, International Macroeconomics, also with Princeton University Press. And we also have with us Jeffrey Sachs, who's a university professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, where he has also been the director of the Earth Institute from 2002, when he joined us from Harvard University, until 2016. Professor Sachs is also the director of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and a commissioner of the US Broadband Commission for Development. He has been an advisor to 3 United Nations Secretary Generals and currently serves as the SDG advocate under Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He has authored numerous bestseller books, and his most recent book is Ages on Globalization, Geography, Technology, and Institution, which is coming out in June. He was named by Time magazine among the 100 most influential world leaders, and ranked by The Economist among the top 3 most influential legal economists. Thank you all, the 3 of you, for accepting my invitation to be virtually with us, and welcome everyone in the audience to this webinar. I want to tell our remote audience that we appreciate your cooperation and orderly participation in this forum. Questions will be open to all attendees using the Q&A option. As the chair, I will select and relay questions to the speakers during the Q&A question reserved at the end of the presentation, from those that are written in the Q&A option and those that I have already received by email before. When you ask a question, please identify yourself, including your name and affiliation, and if you're a representative of the media. There will be a recording of the discussion available at a later day, and simultaneously we're also having it run in Facebook Live in the ILAS Facebook page. Thank you everyone, and we will start the conversation with Minister Guzmán, who will speak for 20 minutes, and then we will have remarks first by Martín Uribe and then by Jeff Sachs. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Professor Victoria Murillo, for inviting me to this seminar. It's a real pleasure and an honor. Thank you, Professor Martín Uribe and Professor Jeffrey Sachs for joining as well. And thank you everyone who joined today to discuss what's been Argentina's response to the COVID-19 in the context of a sovereign debt crisis. Before I start with the slides, we prepared a presentation with slides, let me give you a bit of background on what's been happening in Argentina. When we came to office in December 2019, the economy was already experiencing a deep macroeconomic crisis. economic activity was on the fall. GDP had been falling in 3 out of the last 4 years, and it fell in the last 2 years. All social and economic indicators were showing a deep deterioration of the economic situation. We came with the task of resolving this macroeconomic crisis that included a debt crisis. The debt of the public sector was in an unsustainable position. There were tight constraints for implementing economic policies. And it was in that context that the COVID-19 shock hit us. Rami, ponemos. So, thank you. Good. So COVID-19 hit Argentina after other countries in Asia and in Europe. So we had the advantage that we had learned a bit what were the consequences for other countries that experienced the shock, the impact that it had on the health systems. And given the fragile state of the health system in Argentina, we decided to adopt a very strict lockdown in order to contain the spread of the virus. But as you can see here, Argentina was quite effective at containing the virus. The number of confirmed cases is below other countries in the regions. Same for in terms of death per million people. But of course, this decision came with a large cost in terms of economic activity. So we had a principled approach for responding to the COVID-19. Basically, we followed 3 principles. The first one is that we had to protect health. Health was the #1 priority. That required reducing massively the circulation. We had learned that public transportation was a critical channel through which the COVID could be transmitted from person to person. So we went ahead with this very strict lockdown, but we know that the economic system is prepared to work with circulation of people and circulation of goods. So for the economic system, what this decision entailed was both a demand and a supply shock. People could just not go to work, so sectors of the economy couldn't just produce, and many workers were not receiving income, so they could not demand. Thus, we followed 2 additional principles. The second one was that we had to protect those who fell into a situation of vulnerability because of the economic freeze. And the third one was that we had to protect the embedded knowledge in the enterprises, to protect the organizational capital. And this is going to be of essence in order to avoid that the shock has large hysteresis, that it's persistent, that it persists after the coronavirus crisis is over. We need these valuable firms to continue alive so the country can get back on its feet after the coronavirus crisis is over. So as part of that, we adopted a number of economic measures. First, we implemented cash transfers, different programs for providing direct assistance to households. Second, we extended the unemployment insurance. And third, we decided to protect the existing jobs in the private sector by subsidizing jobs in those sectors that were critically affected by the crisis. Different countries were adopting different models for protecting the economy in the situation of the COVID-19. Given our demographic and institutional structure, and as well as productive structure, we thought we had to adopt these 3 kind of measures at the same time. There is a large informality in Argentina, so extending the unemployment insurance wouldn't have been sufficient to address the needs of those that were in a vulnerable situation. And also we had to protect jobs in the formal sector. That's going to be very important for what comes next. This, of course, it came with a large cost in terms of the public finances. All this package entailed an increase in public spending of about 1.7% of GDP. And at the same time, the fall in economic activity led to a decline in fiscal revenues, increasing the size of the primary fiscal deficit in a context in which we already were facing very tight constraints because we had no access to international credit markets. But these measures were, to some extent, to an important extent, effective. What we see in this slide is what the emergency household income, which was a transfer of 10,000 pesos, which in dollars is about $145, meant for containing the increases in extreme poverty and poverty. Because of this measure, we estimate that we prevented that 2.1 million people fell into a situation of poverty and 2.7 million fell into a situation of extreme poverty. We were doing all of this in the context of a sovereign debt restructuring. Argentina's financing condition had largely deteriorated over the last couple of years. In 2016, the country reaccessed international credit markets in a context that was quite optimistic. The country started to borrow and debt increased, but at the end, there was no sustainable increase in output, not sustainable increase in particular in tradable output. There was no takeoff of exports that would create the foreign revenues in order to pay the debt. And in 2018, and more precisely in April 2018, the country felt a sudden stop. There was a currency crisis. This currency crisis was immediately followed by a program with the International Monetary Fund and a standby agreement that had the objective of restoring financial and macroeconomic stability. But it did not work. On the contrary, when the IMF entered into the picture, expectations destabilized even further. So the country had a second currency crisis in September 2018. And there was a combination of contractionary fiscal and contractionary monetary policies that were supposed to restore confidence and stabilize prices, and it did not work either. So by 2019, the situation was getting worse. There were presidential elections that year. We took office in 2019 in a context in which, as you will see in the next few slides, debt was already unfinanceable, unaffordable, and unsustainable. You see in this picture, the MB Plus for Argentina, country risk first went above 2,000 basis points in early 2019. And then by the end of the year, it went above 4,000 basis points. Today, Argentina faces a country risk of about 3,500 basis points, which means that, of course, the country has no access whatsoever to international credit. The interest paid by the government skyrocketed. It reached almost the levels of the previous crisis, the 2001 crisis. In particular, the interest payments as share of central government revenues reached 18.4%, which is a very large number. It's putting a very big burden on the economy. So we decided to, from the first day in office, we decided to address this problem by engaging into a debt restructuring process. Again, the premises were that we had to restore the sustainability of the debt. We had to redefine the commitments, the liabilities of the country in a way that could be fulfilled. We started the process of engagement with our creditors, an engagement that had to be in good faith, based on realism and common sense, as well as on mutual collaboration in order to restructure the debt in a sustainable way. And we plan to address all the pieces of this debt puzzle in a comprehensive way. We had a situation of unsustainable debt with our private creditors, and as well with the IMF and with the Paris Club. So we initiated a three-way approach in order to restructure the debt with the private creditors, reschedule the debt with the Paris Club, and seek a new program with the International Monetary Fund. The way this process worked was something happened here. Okay, it's okay. Don't worry.
The screen is gone. Something happened with the screen.
Yeah, the screen went off, but I can, okay, good.
We see you instead of the screen now.
We had to handle all these logistical issues during the roadshow and the negotiations with creditors as well. So we're already used to it. The COVID-19 also, of course, had an effect on the whole logistics for all these processes. And as part of that, it is our intention, it was our intention since the very beginning, and it is our intention to have a common understanding with our creditors. Sustainability is of essence for all sides. It's important for creditors as well, in order for us to be able to have a healthy, long-lasting relationship with our creditors. So we started to engage with the IMF from very early in this process. The engagement with the IMF has been very constructive. We've been improving the mutual understanding, redefining the premises over which the new program should be based. And we see that we are now on a positive road on that front. As part of this engagement, the IMF also participated in the process of assessing what was the debt payment capacity of Argentina. There were two visits from the IMF mission to Argentina, in which there were discussions of the economic plans that the country was pursuing. And the IMF finally produced a technical note on debt sustainability. The government of Argentina also produced a debt sustainability analysis, which is a comprehensive analysis that includes the medium and long-term scenarios, as well as the different macroeconomic plans for economic growth within a framework of macroeconomic consistency. We also engage with the different countries of the G7 and the G20. We continue engaging with the creditors. There were negotiations under non-disclosure agreements. As part of the negotiation, we received only one counter offer. And we eventually move forward with an offer, but I'm going to get to that point later on. The offer we made is based on macroeconomic assumptions that constitute the analysis of that sustainability. I don't know how clear these pictures to you, how big or small you can see it in your screens, but these are the different macroeconomic assumptions on which that sustainability analysis was based. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of what's here. First, there is a commitment of the country to achieve fiscal consolidation, followed by a primary fiscal surplus. Argentina, in the past, has suffered from much instability, including instability in the public finances. And it is of essence that the numbers are put in order. So there is full commitment to moving towards along a path that leads to fiscal consolidation. But this has to be done at a speed that is consistent with the recovery of economic activity and with the goal of sustaining that recovery over time. So in the context in which the economy is now, especially in the context of coronavirus, more fiscal austerity that the country was actually doing before would be destabilizing. The country, in fact, has been doing massive adjustments of primary fiscal spending. Over the previous 4 years, primary fiscal spending fell by 5.4 points of GDP, which is a massive adjustment, but it didn't work. On the contrary, that led to a deterioration of the capabilities of the state, some of which we are now, we see the consequences now, and a fall in aggregate demand that didn't come with an increase in the demand from the private sector because of some confidence shock that didn't happen. So the country had been, as I said before, in a situation in which the economic activity was on a free fall. So the path we laid out commits to achieving a debt stabilizing primary fiscal surplus of 1% of GDP. Another very important aspect of this debt sustainability analysis, over which we had the chance to go through in detail with our creditors, is the trade balance and the real GDP growth and the consistency between these two sequences. When the economy grows, the demand for imports grow. In the past, what Argentina has been experiencing is a very unstable dynamic of booms and busts. The country grows, imports grow, but exports do not grow consistently with the growth in imports. So the country starts to lose foreign reserves, and eventually it falls into a situation of depreciation of the exchange rate that leads to inflation, to a fall in purchasing power, a decrease in economic activity. So that's the bust, and then another boom starts. And that's how the country has been going through recurrent situations of defaults. Argentina has had a number of defaults in the past, balance of payment crisis, and of course, this has a very negative consequences for social development. It undermines any process of social development. It creates more exclusion from a large part of the population from formal labor markets. It creates structural problems that are very hard to change later on. So we thought that the debt offer we made in order to resolve the debt crisis had to be based on a consistent framework, and the numbers on real GDP growth are sort of ambitious because we assume that the country converges to 2% of real GDP growth. It's never been easy for Argentina to settle on such a path, and that requires an increase in exports that is consistent with that real GDP growth, which would entail an increase in exports in real terms between 4 and 5%. As part of this debt sustainability analysis, we also laid out a path of targets for accumulation of foreign reserves. Today, Argentina has very tight capital controls that were imposed in August 2019 in a context of a very anxious economy. But for a healthy integration in the global economy, it is necessary that Argentina manages to ease these capital controls and moves to a more reasonable system of capital account regulations. But the economy needs to build resilience for that. So the debt restructuring process also contemplates the possibility of accumulating foreign reserves. And this is it's also a critical aspect for developing the peso debt market. Argentina in the past has been borrowing in foreign currency, and that has led to currency mismatches that didn't play well for financial stability. So we're putting also big efforts, a big part of our efforts are concentrated on developing the peso market, restoring confidence in that market, and providing an anchor for developing capital markets in general. And a historical problem that Argentina has had is the scarcity of savings. After the COVID-19, the country will have the chance to grow without much increase in savings, because there will be a large subutilization of the capacity, of the installed capacity of the country, but that's only for the short term. Eventually, the country will need to invest more in order to sustain the real GDP growth that we laid out in the macro framework, and that requires more savings. And in particular, it requires that our population saves more in our domestic currency, though, so that's also part of this comprehensive plan. So after a period of negotiations under a non-disclosure agreement with our creditors, in which we had presented some reference terms, we got a counter offer back as a response. We assessed it. We considered that it was not aligned with the goal of restoring debt sustainability. It did not meet the parameters of either Argentina's debt sustainability analysis and the IMF debt sustainability analysis. So given what we learned about the preferences of our creditors and the constraints that we face today, the constraints that determine what is sustainable, we move forward with an offer. An offer that asks our creditors for a 3 years grace period. So Argentina will not be paying coupons over from 2020 to 2022, and it will resume paying coupons in 2023. A reduction of principal that is of 5.4% over the total principal, and a reduction of the average coupon. Today, Argentina's average coupon for the debt under New York law is at 7%, and we asked for a reduction of the average coupon from 7% to 2.3%. This restructuring the debt in this way would be effective for restoring debt sustainability. Given the COVID-19 situation, this offer entails a much higher effort in order to restore debt service capacity, but this is a process that we had started before, that it included a debt sustainability analysis performed before the COVID-19, and we decided to move forward with the process because of our full commitment to the goal of having an orderly restructuring. As you can tell, the average coupon will still be aligned with what other countries in the region pay, and it will be certainly higher than what countries in other regions, more advanced economies, pay. The important point here is not so much what is the change, but it's what is sustainable. And as I said, this is what is aligned both with the IMF and with Argentina's parameters for debt sustainability. Over the last, let me just show you a last slide, and then Rami, you take it off. Without a debt operation, Argentina's government debt stock will just be on a non-convergent path. What you see here is clearly that debt would just continue growing as a ratio of GDP to levels that would be even more unsustainable. And this would, of course, entail more problems. Such a debt burden would be destabilizing. The country now does not face, it doesn't have the debt service capacity in order to meet its current debt payments. If it had to do that, it would lead to a fall in the spending of the public sector that would not only be economically unsustainable, it would also be socially and politically unsustainable in a situation that is quite dramatic. 52.3% of Argentine children under 14 years old are in poverty today. So clearly, Argentina cannot go ahead without a debt restructuring process. You can get it out. Let me conclude. I hope I have 1 or 2 more minutes, Victoria. So it hasn't been easy, achieving a deal. So we're still working with our creditors. We will continue doing so. We've been emphasizing the principle of flexibility. Any debt operation that is effective for restoring sustainability will work. There are multiple combinations of parameters in terms of the different elements of a debt offer, a grace period, extension of maturities, reduction of principal and reduction of interest. Luckily, some of the creditors are endorsing the offer, and they will accept the offer that we're making. With some others, we are still trying to reach a deal. And we have a deadline soon, and there's still time. But as I said, for us, it's of essence to have a process that restores long-term sustainability. This is very important for the people of Argentina, and it's also in the best interest of the creditors as well, and it's in the best interest of maintaining a healthy and long-term relationship, long-lasting relationship with our creditors and our investors. So thank you very much again, and if I exceeded my time, I apologize for that, and I look forward to your comments and your questions.
Thank you, Martin. We'll have now Martín Uribe, who will make the first set of reactions and comments.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back to Colombia, Martin. Hopefully next time it's going to be a physical presence. I'm going to play, we're in a university setting, so I'm going to play the devil's advocate. I want to focus on the credibility of the offer of the Argentine government from the point of view of time consistency. The first aspect that I want to touch upon is the guiding principle of the Argentine government, which has been from the very beginning of this administration, even before, during the campaign, the election campaign: no growth, no pay. The principle has been no growth, no pay, which is no problem with that principle. There are many economic units that guide themselves by that principle. For instance, if you buy a share in a company, if the company doesn't do well, doesn't distribute dividends. If the company does well, it distributes dividends. So the principle there is no growth, no pay. The problem with the current offer is that all of the instruments it includes contemplate interest rates that are independent of the level of economic activity in Argentina. Take, for instance, the year 2028. I'm going to take that year as a reference because it's the first year in which all interest rates in all bonds are at their full level. Before that, there's a grace period and they increase gradually. So in 2028, roughly speaking, Martin can give more details, but roughly speaking, the average interest rate is 4%. So the 2.3% that we all talk about, that Martin mentioned, is correct, but it's an average rate of the whole maturity. The time distribution is very uneven. So starting in 2028, the average interest rate is around 4%, and payments of amortization is also around 4%. So the government, starting in 2028, has to pay around 8%, regardless of whether the economy is in a recession or in a boom, whether the economy has a drought, we are an agricultural economy, the country has to pay around 10% of the debt starting in 2028. Now, suppose that the government honors the promise it has made that it will give the rest of the creditors the same deal it gives to the creditors with New York jurisdiction. In that case, payments in 2028 and subsequently would be of around $25 billion because it's 8% on a debt of $330 billion. Now, how did the Fernandez-Kirchner administration solve this problem for itself? Well, he wrote a proposal in which, for the first 4 years, it pays nothing. So basically, the proposal is, I don't pay anything, but don't worry, there will be a government down the road that will pay everything. The question is, how credible is that proposal? Suppose that in 2028, the government faces a recession. I guess that government will have the same right as the current government to say, no, we're going to restructure the debt because I cannot pay, and I'm not going to pay anything for 4 years. And there will be a government in 2036 and later that will pay. And that is the standard time inconsistency problem that we teach our students. That is to say, a government that says, I cannot pay, but a future government will pay. Then when the future government comes, it says, I cannot pay, but the future government can pay, and so on. In that way, we will not break the recurrent vicious cycle of default and restructuring. My suggestion would be for the government to go back and rewrite an offer that pays exactly the same to the creditors in present discounted value. So I'm not arguing for the government to pay less. Come back with an offer that pays the exact same present discounted value. My discussion is not about how much is paid to the creditors, but one in which the Argentine government shares the effort that it requires from future administrations. That is to say, one in which the Fernandez Kirchner administration shares or has an effort that is commensurate with the effort it requires from future administrations. Of course, with taking into account that we are in a pandemic and that has had tremendous consequences for economic activity. So no one with common sense would require Argentina to pay interest or capital during 2020. But in 2022, 2023, the government should make an effort that is commensurate with the effort of future administrations. This would make the offer more credible for at least two reasons. The first one is obvious. If the government starts paying the debt soon instead of waiting 4 years to start paying, future administrations will have a more alleviated situation and will be able, more incentives to pay the debt. The second reason is that by requiring that this government makes an effort to pay part of the debt in a commensurate term with future governments, it will face the need to do something that is almost never in the discussion, which is fiscal reform. Control the out of control increase in public employment. Eliminate the subsidies to utilities. Reduce the enormous markups that the government pays for procurement purposes, buying goods and services for the government. If the government doesn't propose an offer of this type, my concern is that the current offer does very little to break these cycles of recurrent defaults and restructurings. And my concern is also that it's going to do very little to erase the default risk that is in the DNA of government debt in Argentina. So I'm going to stop here. I look forward to the next presentation and to a conversation with Martín and the large audience that is joining us today.
Jeff, I think it's your chance now to talk and provide remarks, please.
Great. Thank you very much. Good to be with everybody. And thank you, Minister, for the presentation, and Martín Uribe, my colleague, for excellent discussion. I think the government has made a good and serious offer, and Martín makes good points, not for the government to redo its offer, but for the bondholders to come back and negotiate. Right now, the bondholders are really in an incorrect position. The debt at 7% coupon rates is completely unpayable. And it was even before the COVID epidemic. Now it's tragically unpayable, and it won't be paid. The bondholders so far have said, well, we don't accept this, you continue to pay. That's the basic counteroffer that has been made. With that, Argentina will not be able to pay, and the first order of business of any country is to take care of its citizens' survival and their basic health. And in an epidemic, I have absolutely no doubt that the right thing to do is to use all resources available to fight the pandemic. What's ironic for me is that the interest rates in this world for safe sovereign debt are somewhere between 0 and 1.5%. And if in Germany, the coupon rate is 0, in the United States, it's about 1.2% on a 30-year bond right now. Why Argentina's creditors should think that they are going to get 7% coupon rates on a safe bond is absolutely beyond me. If they think, well, we're getting 7% coupon rates because the debt is not sustainable and it's going to default, I think that that's actually what the government's saying, which is let's get the coupon rate to something that's sustainable, which is a vastly lower rate. And whether it's Martín's idea of 2.3% on a level basis, or the government's idea that it is very low at the start and builds gradually and gives time for new growth sectors to evolve, both of those are plausible scenarios to me. But basically, the interest rates would be viable, not default-filled interest rates. The creditors have a strange idea. They say that if you cut the interest rate on Argentina's debt, that's a haircut for us. And they make ridiculous calculations in the press every day that Argentina's offer is a haircut of 50% or 60% or 70%. And I couldn't understand that, because what Argentina is offering is actually essentially no haircut at all, a nominal 5% haircut, which I think should be negotiated away anyway, but basically no haircut and a coupon rate that remains higher than, in fact, considerably higher than sovereigns pay in a default-free environment. So where is it written that this is a deep haircut? Well, the creditors are using, apparently, when they make such calculations, a benchmark of 10% exit return or even higher, which is absurd. Why should creditors be getting 10 or 12% return on a default-free instrument? It's ridiculous. What Argentina is trying to do is negotiate with its creditors and a structure that won't lead to default. And interestingly, because the world's interest rates are so low, if Argentina's interest rates were put at the very low levels of a no default sovereign, well, you'd have the possibility and the vast likelihood, actually, of no default. So I think that there's a tremendous confusion or self-fulfilling equilibrium here, if you want to put it in those terms, of very high coupon rates on Argentina's That's leading to cycles of default. And in my view, the obvious way forward is to put low interest rates commensurate with the world's low interest rate environment in a low default framework. And what Martin says also makes sense. There are two Martins here, they both make sense to me. But Martin Uribe, my colleague, says make it a flat, effectively 2.3%. That's fine too. But 7%, which is what they're demanding, or even higher, is absurd. Now, just to put it in a little bit of current reality, Argentina can't pay higher, and it's not going to pay higher in the middle of the worst pandemic in modern history and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and tragically one that could rival the Great Depression in depth and severity if all of this goes wrong. And Argentina is not going to be alone, because there are going to be many, many countries in financial distress in the coming weeks and months. Everybody, every government is seeing a collapse of revenues of 25 or 30% and a rise of urgent needs as households need to survive during a period of lockdown. So fiscal distress is worldwide right now. Argentina was not quite alone in January, but there's a lot of company right now. I'm worried about a general crack-up of the global financial system. This is the kind of crisis that can lead, as it has many times in the past, to dozens of countries entering into a financial crisis. Argentina certainly won't be alone with that. If the creditors were one creditor with rationality, the creditors would say, okay, we will get interest rates down. We don't want a crash. We don't want a panic. We don't want dozens of countries piling up, and would be smart. Maybe they'd come back exactly with Martin Uribe's suggestion of different profiling, but they'd understand, get the interest rates way down. They'd probably want to keep a little bit of a premium above a US or a German Bund return, but they say this has to be safe. Maybe they'd be smart and they'd go to official creditors and say, why don't you help with a guarantee on some part of this as well, sweeten the deal a little bit. And I think that that would be a good thing to do as well. But being tough right now and saying, oh, outrageous what Argentina's asking, they want to reduce interest rates to levels still above what we get on our US Treasury bills significantly, or Treasury bonds significantly, is stupid of them, actually. Really foolish. If they take that position, not only will this crisis not resolve, but they're going to find that that same crisis is going to emerge around the world very, very quickly. It will be tragic if it does. We've lived through financial crashes now in the 1980s in Latin America and other parts of the developing world, in the 1990s in Asia, after 2008, again around the world. And COVID is likely to create the next one, unless we somehow have creditors that are smarter. Now, there is, of course, a collective action problem with creditors. Even if they're all individually smart, they can be collectively stupid by playing a kind of prisoner's dilemma. Okay, you make the deal, I want my full payments. And that may be the dynamic that's at work, but I'm hoping that a few of the large creditors, BlackRock is one obvious one, $7 trillion nearly under management right now, understands that they are system managers, that they have to help maintain a global financial system, not just individual bargaining, and that they will be smart enough to know God, we don't want a massive crash at the moment. So my bottom line is the government is being very professional. I'm not surprised. It's being very serious and consequent in putting forward data, a serious proposal. I think if Martín Uribe is heard well by the creditors, he put forward another serious proposal. They can come back with that. Somebody should come back with something that's sensible. If instead we just get so-called hardball, I'm sorry for the creditors, but you're going to face a colossal collision with reality, because we're not talking about Argentina right now. We're talking about a global crisis, which is the worst since the Great Depression. And I hope that some collective rationality can prevail before we have a massive financial crash. So to the Argentine government, my main advice is fight the pandemic with all that you have. Help people to get through it. Stop the spread of infections. Look at what the United States is doing and do something different, because we've got an absolutely idiotic government. You have a rational government. Look to the experience in East Asia of getting the pandemic under control, but that is your top priority by far. And let's hope and inform public opinion, and hopefully creditors who are listening also be rational, understand this crisis. Don't think that this is some traditional game of chicken or bargaining. It's nothing to do with this. We are in the worst, most dangerous crisis that we have been in modern history. And let's do what we can to avoid a complete financial crash, which could be the second wave, really, of the disaster that we're in. So thanks to Argentina, for the government for putting forward a very serious proposal. And I hope serious negotiations still take place and a realistic solution for all is achieved fast, because we'll all benefit from that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jeff. We don't have that much more time, so I'm gonna put like some of the questions, and we have the comments that have been made for Martín Guzmán. I think in particular, Martín Uribe made a clear proposal. So I just mentioned 3 of the questions and then give it back to you, Martín, so that you can answer. So we have a question from Jose Antonio Campo, which is the extent to which the offers that the Argentina has received are so far from what you expect in terms of sustainability, and what are these offers, and what are the alternatives that Argentina has. I mean, we have Martín Uribe's alternative on the table, and then we had, I don't know, about 20 people who asked very similar questions about the real economy, and I think I could summarize those in: you have a projection of going from like a recession this year, about 6.5%, maybe more, to a growth in 2021 of 3%, decline on fiscal deficit, increase on exports, increase on savings. What are the policies that you have been thinking that will make Argentina grow again after the pandemic? And what would be those policies in the case that Argentina fails in debt restructuring? So what would be these policies if the debt restructuring is successful, and what would be these policies if the debt restructuring is not successful? So I think I have about 20 people who asked variations of this question. So why don't we start with if you want to respond to any of the remarks of Martín and Jeff, and then the other 2 questions.
See. Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you, Martín Uribe. Thank you, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And thank you for everyone who asked questions, Jose Antonio Campo as well. I'll do my best to respond to all of them within, I don't know how much time I have, 3 minutes, Victoria, or 5 maybe. Good. So, with respect to Professor Uribe's remarks, thank you, Martín, for your thoughtful comments. This concern of credibility and the fact that there is a 3 years grace period has also been raised by our creditors. It was in particular, the grace period was one of the most critical elements of the negotiations. In fact, the IMF debt sustainability analysis indicated the need for a 5 years grace period. Initially, in the terms we presented, we included a 4 years grace period, and then it was reduced to 3. And this is not a matter of whether there is one government now or what the government is. This is first a matter of sustainability. We're talking about what can be paid, what is the capacity of the country to meet debt payments in the near future, especially in the context of a massive, not only macroeconomic crisis, but a health crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, and what all of that means for the economy and for the reconstruction of the economy. But very important here, this is not just government policy. Restoring debt sustainability is a state policy. It's a state policy that is being designed and implemented, executed by this government. But this is a state policy. Argentina is united today. We are all together on this. We have the full support of the Argentinian society. Congress gave us full support. There was a law that gave us a mandate to do this, that was passed by almost unanimity in both houses and full unanimity in the Senate. All governors of the country are supporting this process. There was a letter in which all governors of the country provided their support. It was signed by all of them, including governors from the opposition. The opposition is acting today on this front in a responsible way. The opposition has been supporting this process for restoring debt sustainability. The private sector as well. We have got the support of the different parts of the private sector, the industrial union, the banking association, the unions of workers, etc. The mayors. There was also a letter of support from almost every mayor in the country. So this is a state policy. We're all together. There is full support. So it's not just a matter that there is a government today and the government is not committing to something credible. The Argentinian society is committing to something that is sustainable. And if it's sustainable, it can be fulfilled. This is a promise that can be fulfilled. And it's a promise that Argentina will fulfill. Relating this to Professor Sachs' comment, 7% is a risky bet. And we don't want to do risky bets because risky bets may lead to instability. So this is a state policy with the goal of restoring financial, macroeconomic stability in Argentina and setting the conditions for sustained economic recovery and for devolving opportunities to the millions of Argentinians that have lost them, including the 52.3% of children that are today in a situation of poverty. Going to the other questions, Professor Ocampo's question, there are, as I expressed before, multiple combinations of grace period, extension of maturities, reduction of interest, and reduction of principal that are consistent with the tenets of debt sustainability. And we remain absolutely flexible to any debt operation that meet the constraints of debt sustainability. We presented one. The one that we presented captured our best understanding of what the preferences of the creditors were, at the same time respecting the constraints that we face. Of course, if there's always a possibility to learn. There's incomplete information in these negotiations. And if we heard from creditors that there is a different combination of parameters that satisfies their preferences and their interests better, and at the same time respects the debt sustainability constraints, we will, of course, be willing to have a deal based on such an alternative. With respect to the policies, so Argentina first needs macroeconomic consistency. That's a necessary condition for restoring economic growth. A system that is in a state of inconsistency is a system in which it's in a very fragile state, and there are no conditions for implementing the economic policies. The state doesn't have the capacity of implementing the policies it needs, and the private sector doesn't face conditions that are those of a good business climate. It's not a situation of macroeconomic inconsistency. It's not a situation that is conducive to economic development. So we need to do that. And of course, that restructuring is a critical piece of that plan. Commitment to having the numbers in order. Fiscal consolidation, very important. We have publicly committed to have a system of tariffs, the same with the pension system, that the formula for updating pension payments was suspended, and it will be modified by another formula in due time. And all the fiscal policies that are implemented have to be consistent with the macroeconomic framework we have laid out. As part of that, we are going to move to a reform of the tax structure. The tax structure also it reflects the views for economic development that a government pursues. There was a tax reform in 2017 that had the goal of, it was based on the premise that it would lead to an increase in supply without debilitating revenues, and it just didn't happen. What happened was that supply didn't grow and revenues were debilitated, and they contributed to the unsustainability of the public finances. Also, as we discussed previously, in the short term after COVID-19, there will be capital, there will be labor that can be put to work. The country will have the chance to grow without a substantial increase in savings in the short term, but the country will need more savings in the medium to long term. So that's another very important aspect, because we need to have an increase in investments. So we need a development of the domestic capital markets and productive policies. There are productive policies in different sectors that are critical for the development of the economy: knowledge, science, energy. Now we are in a situation in which it's difficult to assess what the impact of the current shocks are for the development of the energy sector. So this will take more time, but we have announced already our commitment to implement a number of policies in a situation of macro consistency that we expect to be conducive of economic recovery and economic development. At the end, the country needs to be able to create jobs, to create dynamism, increases in productivity, competitiveness, and to have to also have an increase in exports, such that the country stops having these problems of recurrent balance of payment crisis. To conclude, going back again to the comments from Professor Sachs, I'm grateful for the support, or for your words of support, Professor. And these are, for us, the fact that there has to be common sense, there has to be realism, especially in a context that is quite dramatic. And we've been acting with responsibility. We've been engaging with every sector of our society, and we are very thankful for the support that we've received at the international level as well. As I said, this is a state policy, is for the future of Argentina. We also grateful for the more than 100 economists letter for the letter that was signed by more than 100 highly distinguished economists all over the world, that was published this morning. And what we need today is common sense and positive leadership. We have a serious problem here. A serious problem with real consequences for real people. So these are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. And we are needing more collaboration on from some of our creators. We will continue engaging fully. It is our intention to reach a successful deal. And we very much hope we face a positive leadership on the other side, proper understanding, common sense, and hopefully we will be able to reach that outcome. So thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I was out. So we have a couple more questions. I mean, we have a bunch, but I'm going with the next two that have been asked by a lot of people. One is about the high level of monetary issue that is now being happening because of the spending needs of the pandemic. And how are you planning to take any measure to avoid very high inflation levels in the future once the pandemic passes?
Thank you. So indeed, we have experienced an increase in the fiscal deficit, and now people just cannot spend those pesos because people cannot circulate. But that in part is what is containing inflationary pressures. Actually, inflation is falling. In April, inflation is going to be even lower than in the previous 3 months, and inflation was already falling. But there is here a risk, and we are going to address that. The sterilization will be necessary in order to absorb part of the increase in the issuance of pesos that was necessary in the context of very tight constraints to implement the fiscal measures to protect the situation, the population in a state of vulnerability.
There's also several questions about your policies to increase exports. As you say, that's a crucial mechanism for growth going into the future. And then I have back debt questions.
Thank you. In terms of policies for increasing exports, first again, macroeconomic consistency is of the essence here. We need to have conditions of competitiveness that at many parts of its history, the country lost, and those have consequences. We've been pursuing a policy also of maintaining a competitive real exchange rate in the context of the COVID-19, and given the fact that there are multiple goals with limited instruments, we've been adapting those policies, but competitive real exchange rate is a centerpiece of the macro framework. And then we there's big value in our view in the role of the state to implement productive policies that are complementary of conditions that the private sector needs in order to develop. At the end, investment will be critical, and my answers before were referring to the plans for increasing investments in Argentina. From the state side, knowledge, science, technology, energy are all centerpieces of the productive policies for increasing exports, at the same time that the state plays a vital role in education and health.
Thank you. You have also some questions here about the debt and whether treating the bonds that emerged from the prior restructuring in 2005 along with the new bonds that emerged from the, after that restructuring, treating them together, it's the good strategy, or excluding those bonds from prior restructuring would give more credibility to the proposal. And then I have questions about how you would treat bonds that are issued under Argentine law as opposed to foreign law.
Thank you, Victoria. So with respect to the first question, what we have is a problem of sustainability, which is comprehensive. So we had to address all the pieces of the puzzle at the same time. So it's a problem of capacity. Now Argentina does not have the capacity to meet debt payments, and that's why we included the exchange bonds in the perimeter of the debt that is being restructured. With respect to the second question, we have expressed that our intention is to provide an equitable treatment to the debts under the different legislations.
Okay, and we have a question here from Sebastian Lacunza, and he asked, will the administration seek to reschedule the payments to the IMF to achieve sustainability for the Argentine economy, or will the government seek to negotiate a new program in order to borrow additional funds from the IMF?
We will seek a new program with the IMF that we will base on different macroeconomic premises than the previous standby arrangement. And as we also face a problem of unsustainable debt with private creditors, Argentina does not have the capacity to meet the payments with the IMF from 2021 to 2023. We don't have any capital amortization coming due in 2020, but the bulk of payments with the IMF is from 2021 to 2023. So it is our intention to not to have to meet those payments simply because we just don't have the capacity. And it is our intention to include that as part of a new IMF program.
Okay, I think we're approaching the end. We have a question here about the role of the Mercosur, given that you want to expand exports, and where do you see the Mercosur in that strategy? Can you hear me?
Yeah. No, we were in mute. We are attempting at having integration is very important. Integration in global markets. These are, of course, turbulent times in which many things are being redefined and redesigned. But Argentina wants a healthy integration, both in international trade markets and international financial markets. So that's why we need sustainability. Sustainability is of essence for the country to have healthy, long-lasting, sustainable relations with the rest of the world.
Okay, I think we are reaching the end of the time, unfortunately, because we had a very long list of questions that I will not be able to ask, but I will forward them to you, I guess. I'm very thankful to Martín Uribe, to Jeff Sachs, and to Martín Guzmán. And I really am very, very thankful for giving your time and your insights in this very, very important topic. Again, I'm Vicky Murillo, the director of the Institute of Latin American Studies at Columbia University. I invite you all to visit our website for more information on COVID-19 in Latin America. You can also will be able to see the recording of the webinar in a few days. And I thank you all in the audience for your participation and good behavior. And I'm sorry if I didn't get to all the questions. There were too many to be asked, but I'm very hopeful that those that were answered were incredibly useful for all of us. Thank you to everyone.